So let's start off with Jason. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
I graduated from IUPUI around 2004, and I got into the video game industry in St. Louis at a small studio called Pop Top. I did one game there that no one's ever heard of called Shattered Union, and then Take-Two had bought Firaxis around that time, and they shut that studio down. So I basically moved from St. Louis to Baltimore, shipped 3 games with them. And then that's when the economic bubble burst and there were mass layoffs. And so I moved back home here, and I've been teaching ever since 2010.
Okay. Jonah, tell us a little bit about your background and who you are.
Hi, my name is Jonah Lobe. I'm a character artist, game designer, illustrator, and fantasy art educator, as well as a streamer. I've worked at Bethesda for 7 years, where I was responsible for a lot of their creature design, including like the dragons and the deathclaws and things like that from games like Skyrim and Fallout. And in the last 8 years, I've been doing more personal projects. I've moved up to New York, and I do a lot more illustration and a lot more fantasy art education and streaming.
Thank you very much. So I read the article for Kotaku that you wrote about Adam Adamowicz. Am I pronouncing that right?
Adamowicz.
Okay, Adam Adamowicz. And you mentioned he has a really specific routine and how it affected how you structure your day-to-day life. Do you have any words of wisdom for growing artists in college who might have a hectic structure and find it difficult to make time to practice and hone their craft?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think establishing a rhythm and establishing a discipline is kind of critical to being an artist, I think, or to be good at any particular discipline of any kind. And I think, especially in college, it can be difficult to establish a rhythm, especially because you have so many other things that you need to attend to, other classes, that kind of thing. When it comes to being in school, I would suggest that people concentrate on being in school and doing the classes well and learning all you can. But it's something to keep in mind going forward in life. It's like, if you're on a sports team or in a club or something in college, you're expected to show up at a certain time, at a certain hour, et cetera, and perform. You're supposed to go to the gym, work out, et cetera. And then when you become an adult, no one tells you to do any of that stuff. And suddenly you're on your own and you have to be your own teacher, your own mentor, et cetera. So I think, it's not something that I want any students at the moment to stress out about or kick themselves if they're not, exercising the best self-discipline. But it is something that you have to keep in mind. And it's the kind of thing that moving forward in life, as with so many things, it's important to just do the thing that you might not want to do, or try to find the time that you don't think you have time for. I find that the best way to put aside time to work on the thing that you like, which is, art, is to try to put a minimum of maybe 20 minutes to 30 minutes a day to do that thing. And in order to make that really work for you, the best advice I can offer, which I offer all the time, is to take away any expectations on yourself for those 20, 30 minutes. Do not expect to do anything cool. Do not expect to do anything that will make you blown away by your own talents and ability. And don't expect to do anything that you're going to show your friends and be like, look how awesome I am. Really, just doing the work at all is 89% of everything that needs to happen for you to become good at what you do. I always say, and I think it's pretty widely understood among many people, is that the hardest part about going to the gym is just going to the gym, is getting up, putting on your gym clothes, getting yourself there, swiping in whatever, and then just working out. And so I think the hardest part about doing art and the hardest part about establishing a discipline is just making yourself do it. And I always find it's much easier on myself, and that I can keep myself doing all the things that I need to do to get better and to kind of stay on top of life and stay on top of my discipline and continue to hone my craft. My craft is simply to focus on showing up. And that's really the best thing I can offer. And so discipline is something that you practice. And you don't kick yourself when you don't do it. You just do it the next day. And again, doesn't need to be an hour, doesn't need to be 3 hours. The more time you can put in, the better. But at the very least, establishing a very small amount of doable time every day will get you in a rhythm and give you the stamina and self-assurance you might need to then push that as time goes on. So you might do 20 minutes a day for 6 months. And then after a while say, you know what, I'm really into this. I'm going to push it to 30 minutes a day or 40 minutes a day or an hour or 3 hours, whatever. And you build up a sense of discipline. It doesn't come naturally. So if you feel as if it's not coming naturally to you or you can't, it's not normal, that's okay. That is normal for you to feel that way. Just show up as best you can, and if you draw or work and just produce garbage for 20 minutes, that's good. You did your job. Now just put it away, go have some fun, and then tomorrow make 20 minutes more of garbage.
I love that answer.
Yeah, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about like your time after Bethesda, like you did with Jason just before the meeting, and your book and your classes, of course?
Sure, that's a lot. I'll kind of ride over the top of those. Okay. I left Bethesda in 2012, kind of about a year or so after Skyrim had come out. I'd been working on Fallout 4 for about, I guess, 6 to 8 months before then, kind of creating creatures for the game, etc. But then I knew that I wanted to leave. My wife lived up here in New York, and I had been spending the previous, I would say maybe 6 years or 5 or 6 years working on a fantasy series. And I was building it in script writing software, and I was building it to be a script for a movie. And then eventually I just decided this wasn't doing it for me. I really love writing, and I think that the chances of my fantasy movie being made into a movie, my fantasy book being made into a movie were quite slim. But my fantasy idea being made into a book was much greater. And then if I got a book made, well, then my movie chances went up. So I just decided, you know what, it's the kind of thing where I had great job security and I had a great thing going at Bethesda. They treated me very well. I got to do really great work, but I had ceased to grow as a fully fledged artist, so to speak, and as a human. I think that there's, it's nice to just chill in like the safety zone for a while and just enjoy what that brings. But I just recognized that, life was long and that I could stay at Bethesda forever if I wanted to, and I could, and I just wouldn't. And I think that would have been profoundly spiritually unsatisfying to me. So I left and I came up to New York, and I thought it would take me 1 year to write my book. And that was a joke. And it took me about 3.5 years to write my book. I was able to secure a book agent that fell through, and my book agent actually left the industry altogether. And now I'm at a point where I'm kind of outlining the rest of the series and kind of working myself into a good position to reapply for agents and try again to get my book out there. So that's a series called the Alvani Saga. And I've done some art for it on my Patreon. Some of my patrons, they've been reading it, book one, and I'm working ways for them to contribute ideas and to stir the pot and to kind of get a backseat look at what it's like to world build. Because I think that's one thing I'm very passionate about. And I think it's one reason that I was a character artist for many years, and that I've become a writer and an illustrator since then, because I like to tell stories. So in addition to the other things that I've done in these last 8 years, I worked on an indie game for 1.5 years. It was called Fireborn, and I was the art director, and I did 100% of the art, the heads-up display, the characters, the monsters, the weapons, the environments, the trees, the rocks, the mountains, the sun, the moon. I made the web marketing art. I helped work on our trailer, etc., and the whole thing fell apart. And so walked away with nothing on that one. So that was a bit of a stinging blow, but I learned an enormous amount at that time about contacting press, about marketing, about agents, about if I were to work on another game again, I know exactly what I would have to do differently. So there's a lot of lessons learned there. I worked on another job for another year and a half with Adobe. That's a secret project. I can't tell you about it. It got canceled though. So that one also fell apart. But I otherwise work on a number of contract jobs for different games. The System Shock remake, Crowfall game, which is coming out now. These are things I've been doing freelance work for, and I do illustration work, a lot of pen and ink work for myself, for various endeavors, for art galleries, and then for TTRPGs, tabletop RPGs. Which are, as you probably know, gaining a resurgence in the nerd world and beyond. So it's been, and I've been doing a lot of streaming, and that has led to, I've been doing streaming with Adobe. I do that to this day with Adobe. And in the last year, I've started my own YouTube channel, and I'm starting to populate that with art stuff, game stuff, industry stuff, and general fantasy world building. So I just started that this year, but I'm working into it with ever serious, with ever greater seriousness. And then lastly, I have been working on fantasy art education, and I've been starting my own series of master classes on various aspects of fantasy art. So the one I have out now is called Chimera, a creature design masterclass, and it's all about how you conceive of and create original, never before seen and yet iconic creatures. My next course, which I'm working on now, is on personality in the face. So how to conceive of different aesthetics and how to imbue faces with personality that connects with the viewer and forms like a lasting impact, because I'm a big believer in personality and emotional connection being the best way to connect with your audience.
Absolutely. Can you screen share here and show us some of your work that you've done in the past few years?
Of course, yeah. All right, let me do this here. Share screen. Host disabled, participant screen sharing.
Whoops. 1 second. Very professional. Okay, there you go.
All right.
I'm gonna have to drag around the overlays and everything, so please bear with me, chat.
No problem. This was just, I was working on demonstrating musculature, and how to draw that on stream yesterday. So that's why that's up. I've also been doing, can you see me by the way?
Yeah. Give us just 1 second. I have to
Sure.
make sure everything's all good. Gotta drag everything around.
Oh boy.
Yes. Hold on, let me turn off. I'm just gonna turn off our webcams for a sec. Okay. Yeah, they can see your screen now.
Excellent. Okay, great. I was just referring to these drawings here. I was talking about anatomy on stream. I have a Behance channel as well as a Twitch channel. So I was talking about basically muscles and how they wrap around the body, etc. This is another thing I did in the last 2 weeks. I was discussing the process by which you might take a cartoon, first about how you might conceive of a cartoon, get it together, and then change the style completely, in this case into something kind of a realistic style cartoon. But when it comes to my my art that is traditional art, I'll show some of that stuff, and then I'll show some of my work on Skyrim and Fallout. So this is all pen and ink artwork that you're seeing, and each of these is based on, I had basically my Instagram audience pick a word of the day, and I would then use that word to create a piece of art that nobody has seen, and that I had never drawn before. And the purpose here was to, that's a little not safe for work. The purpose of this was to push my own style and get myself out of my own safety zone. I was finding that if left to my own devices, I draw a lot of the same things again and again. And I think maybe some of your audience might have experienced the same thing before, where you don't know what to draw, and so you just put pen and paper and you just draw kind of what you usually draw. So I decided that this was probably not a good way to grow, and that I wanted to grow, so I asked my audience, give me a word, and then they would give me a word, and I would try to think of a novel way to illustrate that. There's a deathclaw from Fallout. So this is Demon, for instance. This is actually a character from my series, the main character. Desiccate, which means to dry out, like a mummy. Didactic, I believe it was. Pass. Dogma. I crossed Judge Dredd with a Crusader Knight. This was a picture of Don Quixote. No word for that, actually. That's just a picture of a doomed demon. So was that. Double was the name for this one. Drool was the name of this one. That's nothing. This is ebb, like the tide ebbing. So my goal here really was every single time to come up with something that I myself had never done before, and just try to pull it off and see, what I could create, based on a word. And so it was a very helpful exercise for me. It really kind of got me thinking about composition and about process. And this is, something like composition is not something that you have to think about when you work in 3D sculpture or 3D modeling, because you're just creating a single item or a single character on just in space, in a vacuum. And so creating these got me thinking more and more about how one conceives of a certain amount of space and how one uses that space to tell a story. And I did this specifically because I wanted to grow. I wanted to learn to do art in ways I'd never done before. And so I did this a couple years ago. That's Ayla the Huntress. You might recognize her from Skyrim. Inchoate, which means not fully formed. Venomous. Irremediable, which means cannot be undone. Yeah, so this is a series just of, it's just black and white pen and ink art done with Copic markers and pens. And you can see any of these on my Instagram, and some of them are available for purchase on my shop. Now I'll show some 3D work. You guys might know this fella. So again, my specialty was creature design for Bethesda, and I just love creatures. I love animals, and I love inventing them. So this is a character. This is the Deathclaw from Fallout 4. And for anyone who's curious, I know there's a lot of game design students there. I'll show you my wireframe setup. And I'll just throw on a default texture. So you can kind of see how he's built with his, actually, or I can throw this on and get rid of the albedo map. There we go. So you can see both the wireframe and you can see the normal there as well, to see how it all kind of comes together and how it's all built. So yeah, if it weren't for like a program like ZBrush, I wouldn't be doing the work that I've been doing these days. A program that allows me, somebody who's rather technically inept in the grand scheme of things, or at least within my industry, to still compete. A program like ZBrush really allows me to remain like a purist artist in a techie field and still give me a room to play. So this was a lot of fun to do. This is of all the creatures I made, I think the Deathclaw is the one I'm most proud of. But there's a lot more of that. So I can show you a couple more things from that. Actually, I'll show you something I just finished, actually. Sentinel of the Sun. So I just did some work for the Crowfall game, the MMO. So you can see there's a very different, I don't know what this is all about. Oh, I know. Actually, I do know what that's about. Very different style. And again, I like that about what I'm about to show you, because it pushes me out of my comfort zone. It pushes me to try new things. Okay, what's going on? I know the problem is I just submitted all these files today to the company, and I renamed some of them and changed and moved some of them around. So we might come in with some blank textures here. Yeah, we did. Okay, that's all right. Well, yeah, I can't show you. Sorry, the albedo map is missing.
It's okay.
Unless I can find it here. Is this it, more or less? More or less. There you go. More or less. It's not perfect, but it's close to that. So basically, this is a giant dwarf whose skin is stone and whose hair is roots. And there's supposed to be candles here that glow, but that's one of the textures that are missing. But essentially, I've done now 2 of these characters. So the other one is here, and they're going to be these big characters in the game. You know, the players, looking up at them like this, and they're just these huge titans. And so that's the one thing I've done. So as you can see, it's a very different style from the Deathclaw.
Can we see the wireframe on those, please?
Certainly, yeah. The wireframe is more extensive on these actually, because their art style is a lot less dependent on normal maps and a lot more dependent and on texture, and a lot more dependent on polys, kind of to define a lot of the contours, etc. So if I get rid of the specular map here, maybe I can just bring the intensity down, and I can even maybe get rid of the normal maps there. There you go. So it's a little denser, as you can see, especially in the areas of like the beard, that kind of thing. I mean, it's not probably denser, as you can see, than in some places than it needs to be. I still keep things pretty low poly. When things are simple, like they are in the back here, as you can see, it gets very dumbed down. But then there's these metal candles, which are not supposed to be that way. But yeah, so I do everything. I'm very accustomed to like the low poly workflow, and I almost don't even know how like high poly artists who work in ZBrush and make these beautiful sculpts. I don't know how they don't use a game art methodology, but I'm very accustomed to it at this point. So
what's your workflow?
I work, I'll start from high poly, and I'll craft a high poly from that, and then I will build a low poly in TopoGun for that object, and then I'll UV map it in 3D Studio Max and then project. And I've taken to projecting things in Marmosets. You can use any number of different software, but I've found Marmoset to be an absolute pleasure to work with when it comes to projecting normals. Yeah. So I can show you, there's a couple other things. I mean, I got a lot of other things I can show you. Here are some swords that I worked on, or I'll show some Skyrim stuff, because I guess people want to see that. All right, let's open this up and hope for no errors. I'm going to show you the draugr from Skyrim. The draugr were a lot of fun to do. They were one of my favorite creatures in the game. And just because they've got a lot of personality. I loved their armor, making their armor. Just a fun fact, if you see armor in the game in Skyrim that has this hammered metal look, except for the steel armor, that's a Jonah Lobe piece of art. Yeah, I just wanted to do like something that wasn't just steel, that was just polished. I wanted to create something that looks handmade, and that's one thing I really liked about creating things for Skyrim. Basically, it's because that's one of the reasons I love fantasy as a whole, is because everything in these worlds is handmade, and everything during the more medieval period, or any kind of historical period, was made with a lot more love and attention. And you can see so much about culture and history and everything like that based on kind of the way things were built. So it's one reason that I like fantasy so much more than sci-fi, is because there's a handmade element to medieval level stuff. Actually, if I show you the wireframe here, you might notice that it's even way more simple even than these most recent things. So if you look at that, there's 2012 or 2011, I guess, for you. It's much more dumbed down, and with the exception of animatable parts of the face, you can see just like even from a distance how much more basic it was at the time. Yeah. Shall I show a few more things? Or how we looking on time?
So we've been rolling for 25 minutes.
Okay.
At the moment. Fox Monsieur in chat says the Judge Dredd portrait was wonderful, and your giant dad is awesome too.
Thank you very much. For anyone who's unsure as to what this person is referring to, the giants in Skyrim they were based on my father. So if you want to know why they look maybe so familiar, or why they all the giants in the game look like 65-year-old Jewish men from Seattle, that is the reason. These are some swords that I've just made. These are one of the things I did post leaving Bethesda. I kind of just did them for no reason at all. I just had time on my hands and I was feeling creative. Oops, I don't know where the textures for that went. That's gone. But they were a lot of fun to do, and they were definitely within keeping within my comfort zone. But I never got to do actually any swords for Skyrim because I was so busy doing the creatures that I really wanted a chance to do some original work on my own, at least, if not for the game. So, and I think I did them on stream. I think they were one of the few things, one of the first things I did while working on Twitch. I think I made them on stream. Show the Mirelurk King. I'll show you the Mirelurk King, and then we can maybe move on if that's what.
Okay.
There we go.
What would be your real world anatomy inspiration for the Mirelurk King? Where did you draw inspiration from for this?
That's a tricky one. That's many different sources. So this is the face is the Dunkleosteus, which is an extinct, hard-shelled, heavy boned fish that you can see in most museums. That's the build of the face. But otherwise, the Mirelurk King is definitely a monstrosity and doesn't come from one source or another. Fish were one of them, the lionfish, I believe, for these crazy fins, jagged fins. Amphibians were certainly a huge part of it. He's got this kind of wrinkly, saggy amphibian skin everywhere. Deep sea fish, certainly, for all the disgusting nastiness and all that. But otherwise, I kind of just conceived of him. I kind of went off script. I was given concept art, and to me, it just looked too generic, and so I kind of went off script and made him look even wilder. And I don't know if that was particularly well received, but I was happy with the results. So the idea here was that I gave him these. Basically, his hands and feet are fins that have split apart and become articulated. And so that you can see his hands, his arms are actually these folded in tendons that go all the way in, and then they unfold into these fingers. And so the fingers themselves can actually, splay out 180 degrees. And the same thing for the fins as well. They the whole leg folds in on itself and then unfolds into the kind of the fin foot. I was basically just trying to think of, what is, this thing is shaped like a human, but it's not actually human in any way. So how would it evolve under intense radiation to have a biped formation, but not look like it's evolved from human at any point? So I created these kind of almost lung-like, like book lung growths here in the chest. The intestines are down here in the stomach. Again, the hands are not typical hands, although they are typical hands, but they're not. And the same thing goes for the gills and all that. So, Yeah. So all kinds of sources from all kinds of places, but I kind of went a little nuts with this one, I think. So yeah, there's a glimpse at some of my stuff, and if we have time later on, I can show it later. But for now, let's get back to the questions, I guess.
So yeah, I was just gonna say the anatomy on the Mylar King is insane. Like, just the the muscles and I love looking at that stuff.
I may have gone a little overboard.
But yeah, so back to the questions. Let me see here. Yep. So you mentioned while you were in college that you got a good art education, but you feel like it didn't really prepare you for a job in the industry. What do you think colleges can do to better prepare you for a job after college?
So I went to a liberal arts college, and they were not equipped to get me ready for the game industry or the entertainment industry. And so I'm not sure that I can make a judgment call about universities and colleges in general, because I did feel like I was going off script a bit. I think I got a really good education, an all-around education, and I got a good art education. But I was a studio art major, which is ironic because I just don't usually work in. The only studios I work in are game studios or my own personal studio. I don't slot paint around. I don't sculpt. So while I really appreciated the knowledge I gained in those institutions, I just don't think they were prepared they didn't have the knowledge, I don't think, to prep me for my particular industry. I don't think there'd been many people graduating from my school who went into the game industry. I do think that building proper expectations is good. I think that both encouraging a student to have an open mind about what they want to do, and encouraging a student to really interrogate why they want to do that. You know, I think I get a lot of people contacting me saying, I really want to work in games. I love games. You have my dream job. I would love to work in games. And that's indicative of a great deal of passion, but maybe not perhaps a good sense of like, but why do you want to do that? Or what do you feel you have to offer? Or what part of games do you want to work in? Because often the answer is, I don't know. I just want to be a part of this world. I do think that it kind of goes in two different directions with this, which is, on the one hand, I would like colleges to gear students and help them especially in their final year, sharpen their prospective role to a fine point so that they can enter the industry in a particular place. What I mean by that is, when I graduated from college, I had this I had this expansive art portfolio that showed I could do different kinds of art, but that didn't get me a job anywhere, because being a good artist in general is nice, but it doesn't really prepare you to sit down on day one and start performing. So the best advice I got after college was work on your portfolio and tailor your portfolio towards a particular role within a company, so that they can A, see that you are very good at that one thing, and B, they know that they can hire you, and on day one you can start working, actually getting to work for them, and they don't have to teach you things. Once I heard that, I started focusing more on just character art and mastering the character art pipeline. My other piece of advice goes in the other direction altogether, which is try to help the students be cognizant of their greater life whys. Why do I want to do this? Why does this move me? And if I can't get this particular role, like how can I satisfy this part of my soul? Because a game, I have a talk that's available online called "My Heart Has a Nose" that I gave at the Ottawa International Game Conference, and my heart has a nose essentially is kind of just a pithy way of saying my heart doesn't know what it wants exactly, but it can sniff in the direction that it wants, and that you need to learn to trust that sniffing. And so, an industry job sounds like a dream if you don't have one. And, you know, for some limited number of people, they get the industry job and they're like, I am in heaven. This is life from now on. But I think what most people find and discover is that an industry job, even if the place is fantastic, is still a job, and it is your 9 to 5. And, you know, studies show that, you know, when you pay somebody to do what they want to do all the time, it doesn't necessarily work out in everyone's favor. And, you know, that, you know, a similar thing happened to me when I was working at Bethesda, because I started dreaming up this fantasy universe called the Alvani Saga. And I started pouring more and more energy into that, to the point where after the release of Skyrim, which was arguably one of the biggest games that we've ever released, and that ended up kind of being inducted into the Hall of Fame, it wasn't enough to keep me. You know, it's kind of like, this was wonderful, but my dreams have moved on. And so I think that I see a lot of burnout, I see a lot of fatigue, and I see a lot of kind of creative stagnation that a lot of creatives who enter the game industry or other industries experience, and they don't understand why, and they don't understand maybe what's wrong with them. And so I think being in touch with your true passions as a human and your true desires as a human or as a creative, and understanding, you know, well, if I didn't get this job, how can I still move in that direction? And so not even knowing, not identifying a specific job ultimately as the dream place, but understanding, well, I like stories. Oh, I like characters. Oh, I'm fascinated by color. I'm fascinated by composition or music and how it affects mood, etc. Any one of these fascinations leads you, the player, down a whole skill tree of like possible options for your future. And so understanding and being in touch with these deeper passions of yours, and really trying to, again, I use the word interrogate because it just means really questioning very seriously and deeply your own self, can, I think, give you a better feeling of maybe where you want to go in life, and can give you greater stability when things don't quite work out the way you want them to, and a greater understanding of maybe why that's the case and how that can be rectified. So one of those answers is very cerebral, and one of those is very particular. So colleges should definitely focus on getting kids ready for a particular role as best they can, or at least if they're not equipped to offer that particular kind of education, helping to identify with that kid what exactly within that certain industry they could be interested in, and help them nail down in a list to themselves what will be required to get that job. Because I think a lot of people looking for jobs just don't understand the requirements and don't understand what's being looked for. And while your teachers and professors might not have the answers to that, perhaps they can help the student to answer those questions themselves, or investigate that on their own.
Thank you. That was a really good answer.
That. Yeah, I think every freshman should hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking on what you said a little bit through that, in terms of burnout, a colleague of mine who recently graduated was talking about on social media that creating illustrations for other people has turned her beloved hobby into her worst enemy. Have you ever felt this way? And if so, how do you overcome it?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I overcome it by, it's tricky. I do use a little of my own, at this point, because of the titles I've worked on, I have gained enough kind of confidence from any potential employer that, you know, if I fly off script a little bit, you know, trust me, you know, like I will take us somewhere fun, and that will allow me greater ownership of what I'm working on. I was able to keep myself fresh at Bethesda for so many years because I would do two things whenever I got an assignment. You know, the art director and the designer would basically say, we want you to do X. And here is 3 drawings that a concept artist did for X. And, you know, go make it in 3D now. And so I asked two people one thing. I would basically say to the art director, what are the elements of the concept art that you love most? And that, basically that you don't want me to touch, or that you are most connected with and you want me to preserve somehow as I translate this 2D into 3D. And that gives me a good sense of what I shouldn't mess with, because ultimately your employer is your client. They are the person whose opinion matters most. Whether or not you think that they're good at their job or anything, they matter most. You need to please them. And then I would turn to the concept artist and I would say, what were you looking at for inspiration for this thing? And the question for that was in the same vein of my Instagram word of the day. It was basically a challenge to myself to keep things fresh. Again, if left to my own devices, I will create what I want to create, which might not be the most inspired thing. It might just be what I feel most comfortable doing or what moves me most. But by asking the concept artist what they were looking at, what inspired them, what drove this design, that can go a long way towards feeding me new information, giving me a challenge to incorporate things that I hadn't thought about into this design in perhaps novel or unexpected ways. And that kept me fresh. And then asking the art director what they liked told me what was out of bounds in my redesign. And then I would start designing things, and I would go off the concept mostly, but I would also go off script and have fun with it. Whatever I felt moved me, whatever I felt was cool. And that helped me within my role stay fresh and not feel like I was just a cog in a machine making someone else's art. It enabled me to feel like I was making my own art for this grander vision. So something like, the Skyrim giant looking like my father. The concept art kind of looked like my father. Maybe that's why I got the idea, but I kind of just really went for it. I was like, I'm just gonna make this to Jim Lobe. And the Skyrim Spriggans, for instance, the concept artists, it was made of wood, it had green lights, little, like glowing lights, but it looked like a dryad, like a normal dryad. And I thought, I don't want to spend my month making something that people have seen before. So again, I kept the things that the client liked, and then I moved on and I added things like antlers and hooves. And I talked with an effects artist, and together we collaborated and made the glowing things inside of her actually like alive, like bees, and they sound like bees in the game. And that again enabled me to have a certain amount of ownership on the thing. So I think that trying to stake out a particular, and learning how to stake out for yourself what you would like to work on and what you'd like to riff on when creating for somebody else is very important, because that will basically allow you greater ownership of whatever you're doing. Also, just recognizing that, if you're doing client work for somebody else, whether it's freelance or otherwise, limiting your number of hours, limiting the amount of input you put in there, and making sure that the lines of communication are up and running throughout the entire process. Because I think one of the reasons that people, like the individual you just mentioned, get so sick and tired of designing for other people, among many other reasons, can be a client who just keeps bouncing things back and wanting to change this or wanting to change that. So it is incumbent on you, the artist or the creative, to frequently check in with your client, update them on your process, on your progress, because ultimately if you work really hard and you create something you're really proud of and you show it to them, ta-da, and they say, it's not really what I wanted, or that's great, can you change X, Y, and Z? And you're like, well, no, I'm past those steps. I can't do, then you're going to hate them. You're going to hate yourself, but you'll really only have yourself to blame. So I think one of the harsh realities of working out there in the world is that the client is right, and you need to work around them. And so establishing for yourself and trying to be honest with yourself about the best working ways, the best way that you can communicate, set expectations, etc., will yield you the most smooth working experience with them. And again, like I said, staking out, what you are free to, the areas where you can riff on things, will again allow you a feeling of ownership, and it will make it less their art and more your art that you guys now share together. So trying to establish that workflow and trying to find spaces where you can work on, riff on your own thing is helpful. And then in general, otherwise, just spending your free time working on your own kind of thing. It does a lot to fill the batteries.
Good answer. Jason, do you have anything you'd like to ask, just so I'm not, talking over you?
Well, I know you had a bunch of. We got till 7.
Yeah.
7? All right.
7 at least. We may go to 7:30 depending.
That's fine with me. Yeah, I'm prepared.
All right. So I'll just move on then. So in the past, you mentioned struggling to strike a balance between your family, your work, playing the social media game on that grind, and personal time for mental health. Have you found that balance? And if so, do you have any advice for growing artists trying to find that balance themselves?
Yeah, balancing, you said real life, social media life, work life,
family, work, so many moving parts. It's juggling.
Yeah, it's a lot. Have I found that balance? I don't know. I'm always working on it. 2019 was a difficult one for my mental health. I just had a baby. I had recently been told by my book agent that she was leaving, and that I'd have to find, new ways around that. And giving up, having to give up so much of my professional life and standing to focus on my family was a big hit. Even though 2020 is definitely the worst year ever, I've been generally doing a better job of shepherding my mental health, and recognizing that what I ultimately need to be as a human, one of the things I need to be good, strong, and positive for my family, for my wife and my kid, and doing what I can politically and in the world, being an active member of and citizen of this country and of this world, and being the best possible influence I can be, and doing what I can, and then unplugging from the rest. So I am not a believer in ignoring the world or the politics or any of that, and I'm definitely a believer in trying to make the world a better place. But I'm doing a better job this year of jettisoning those feelings of despair or of helplessness, whatever, kind of just like, I'm focusing on doing what I can, and then at the end of the day, letting those stuff let go, let it go, and get back to, just trying to just focus on myself. Establishing basic exercise routines is huge. I think we forget that as humans, we are animals. And if you kept your dog indoors all day, every day, by like the middle of the first day, they would be like a nervous wreck. They'd be so unhappy. And I think we forget, because we're humans and we have computers and iPhones, and we think with our mind and all that we can stay happy forever in our basement. Unfortunately, COVID is making us stay in our basements a lot more than we otherwise would. And we can't go to the gym, but just getting outside, going for regular walks, at least, this stuff is important. Just like going to the gym, like we mentioned earlier, just making it happen even when you don't feel like it is imperative. I think also trying to be realistic about expectations. I take a great deal of pride in my professional standing, in my social media standing, etc. And so much of the purpose of all that is because I want to position myself professionally to basically, again, come back around to my fantasy series. And when I release that, basically have an audience, have it ready. But this, in the last year or so, I've kind of really restructured my expectations of myself and just been basically honest with myself and being like, listen, man, you can't do it all. You're doing much more now than you were doing a year ago when your daughter was 3 months old and she was just like a little screaming burrito. And now she's like a person, and we have my mom taking childcare and all that. So I'm not working as many hours as I used to at work, but I am working better and more efficiently than I was before. And I am working more. Every month I'm working a little bit more than I was before, and I'm getting things back. So setting realistic goals, exercising yourself, really staying on top of your mental health, reaching out to friends if you need to, doing all the things that you need to really keep your brain on straight, because these are very trying times for all of us. And I think also in last year, the last 6 months especially, recognizing that like the world's in shambles and I got it pretty good. And so like really practicing gratitude, and in the same way as you practice love or practice gratitude or practice your art, really practicing means just like showing up and just trying to acknowledge what it is and doing, even if you don't feel like it, practicing that thing. So, you might feel like you had a really, really terrible day, but if you sit down and actually count your blessings, oftentimes we're doing pretty well. If you got your health, if your loved ones are doing okay, then you're okay. You're okay. There's a lot. Of course, you want to do this. Of course, you want to do that. Like, I want to be rich and famous. I am neither. I want to have a book series. I don't have one. Like, all these things. I can complain all day, but I also make art for a living, and I'm healthy, and I have a beautiful baby daughter, and like things. You know what I mean? It's like you have to like really almost sit down and enumerate what you have. And I think that's a really good exercise, and it really does, if you're doing it regularly, kind of put things in perspective, because you can't actually live in someone else's shoes. You don't know what it's like to be somebody else. And so the grass might be always greener. But truly, I think one thing I've learned, especially as I've just gotten older and as years have gone by, is that everyone's having a hard time, man. Like, everyone's stressed out all the time. All those people that you think have got it going on, like, they don't feel that way, probably, and truly one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is that is like a universal theme. They say like, oh, like, you think you're the only one who's got it bad. Well, I've come to learn that like, oh no, you're not only are you not the only one who's got it bad, everyone's got it bad, right? In their own minds. Unfortunately, in 2020, actually everybody has it bad. But I think practicing gratitude and practicing, focusing on your mental health, et cetera, and practicing setting realistic expectations are all really, really helpful in living out there, because the world can be hard and tough, but working on these aspects of your life really pays dividends. And yeah.
I got one, Alex.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. Now I know you were talking about how your education wasn't ideal for going into gaming, and that you were being humble and saying that Bethesda wasn't really that big right before Oblivion. But I remember when Morrowind came out, I walked, students, for those of you watching, I walked from campus to downtown to the GameSpot to buy the collector's edition of Morrowind.
Amazing.
I also had a friend in college before that who did not graduate college because of Daggerfall. So,
wow.
Yeah, a huge Bethesda fan, longtime Bethesda fan. I would like you to describe your journey from a less than ideal education path to what you did to get your portfolio, or the steps that you took to get your dream job.
Yeah, certainly. Well, let me just back up one half step and just say, when I say it's less than ideal, education, I don't want to mislead about that. I really, really had a great education. I loved my college. They just weren't geared to get me ready for my industry, because my industry was rather unusual for a lot of the people there. But great question. So I graduated from college. I sent out a whole bunch of applications to a whole bunch of places, including Bethesda. I didn't hear back from any of them. And so then I was like, well, that's a bad sign. I should probably figure out what's up with that. So I didn't know who to ask. And so I went to a convention called SIGGRAPH, which maybe some of you have heard of. It's a computer animation convention. I had not yet heard of E3. I was such a newbie. I didn't know And although I'm glad I went to SIGGRAPH, I was open to different things. I wanted to work maybe in movies. I wanted to work in games. I thought I had a better chance in games because there were more game studios. And within game studios, the art assets for games are more numerous and lower quality than they are in movies. Because in movies, you make a thing that's designed to be in 13 shots total, and that's it. And that's, but they've got to be the best things, for that little whatever. So I thought that if I worked at a game company, I would be able to do a lot more art a lot faster instead of being the guy who made Blades of Grass for 4 years, And I think I came to that conclusion because I did visit one graduate from my college who worked at Pixar, and I was like, Pixar is the place I want to be. And I went out there and I saw the campus, and it was stunning. It was gorgeous, and it looked like an incredible, fun place to be. And then he showed me what he was working on, and he'd been working on for a year and a half water droplets on cars for the movie Cars. And I thought two things. I thought, A, this movie looks pretty cool, and B, I don't want to do that. Like, that sounds terrible. So I thought the games would be the way to go. So I went to SIGGRAPH, I brought my portfolio, and I basically went to the hiring area, to the game area, where they were looking at portfolios, et cetera, and performing interviews, et cetera. And I sat down and I remember I had one conversation with one particular individual, this guy, and I asked him basically, here's my portfolio. What aren't you seeing that you would need to see to hire me? Like, tell me what I'm missing, basically. And he said, you've shown that you're a very good artist, and that's really important because, you can teach a good artist to be a game designer. You can't teach a good game designer to be an artist. But you're not demonstrating proficiency in one particular realm. That you have to basically show that you are good at one specific job and that you're the best at that job, and forget all the other stuff. Because I had some paintings, I had some pen and ink artwork, some concept art, et cetera. And I had a couple of 3D models, that kind of thing. And they were like, pick one, And so I went home and I spent about 6 months constructing 4 different original creatures. I sculpted a demon head in ZBrush. I did a Murdral, which is an eyeless human from the Wheel of Time fantasy series. I made a mechanical spider that was all rusted out, and I made an alien with 4 arms, but in a very cartoony, like lovable, geeky style. And so my purpose was to show that I could do multiple different kinds of things. Each one of these was very different from the other. But that I was familiar with the concept art pipeline, the modeling, the UV mapping, et cetera. And after 6 months, I had this kind of new, updated, specialized portfolio. And I also did something which I'm sure you cannot do now, but I was looking at Bethesda, which was 20 minutes from my mom's house, which is where I was staying. And I hadn't heard from them twice already because I applied again. I applied once between my junior and senior year of college for an internship, which they actually were not even offering, but I just hoped that maybe it would happen. And then I applied again after college, didn't hear back both times. And so I looked on their website, and they had an interview from a guy who was something called a character artist. And I said, character artist, like that sounds like I want to be an artist and I love characters. I want to do that. And so I cold called them. And I said, can I speak to Gary Noonan? And they were like, yes, sure. And then they paused and they said, is he expecting your call? And I was like, no, but can I? And he picked up, and he basically gave me, he was very confused as to who I was, but he was very nice to me. And I basically said, I want to apply to Bethesda again, but if you could give me like a tip on like what they're looking for or what I should do. And his tip to me was send my portfolio directly to Todd Howard. Because, if Todd Howard didn't like what he saw, that I wouldn't get the job. And if he liked what he saw, he probably wouldn't be so annoyed that I'd contacted him directly. He'd probably just be like, well, I like his stuff. And so that was probably the answer. So again, I don't think you can do that to this day, because Todd Howard was not known as God Howard back then. And he wasn't like I think if you were in the industry, you knew him, but otherwise he was just the guy who had the executive producer role. So I addressed my envelope to him and I sent it in, and that was on a Thursday. And then on a Saturday, I just wrote him a follow-up email, just saying, hey, my name is Jonah Lobe. I sent in this application. Just want to let you know, it's in the mail, and keep your eyes open for it. And then he wrote me back 20 minutes later and he said, we got it. I like it. We'd like to send you an art test. And I like just there in my underwear in my mom's house, just did a little dance. And I was like, oh, it's on.
What was your art test? What was your art test?
My art test was a Fallout 3 raider. So they hadn't released Oblivion yet, but they sent me this concept art that to me looked like Fallout. I was like, I've played Fallout. This looks like Fallout. But they didn't say what it was from. But it was a back and front view of a raider, and they basically said he said, make this in 3D. There's no time limit, but we will be seeing generally how quickly it takes you. Don't worry about limitations. Don't worry about poly count, nothing like that. Just make it in 3D as cool as you can. And then I basically just spent 2 weeks, 12 hours a day, just chugging on this art test. And I knew that he had all kinds of accoutrements, all kinds of details, all kinds of little things. The artist that you referenced earlier, Alex, but when I did the article about Adam Adamowicz, he had done the art, and his work is very scribbly and suggestive. It's short on details and heavy on implied detail. And so there were so many doohickeys and gadgets all over this guy that I was like, well, I cannot do that. Like I would just grind to a halt, try and make all those different things. But what I knew I could do is if I create a general feeling about this raider and a general aura of menace, then I could form an emotional connection with the viewer. And that basically, if they looked at this guy and they looked at his face and and his face was looking right back at them and they could feel who he was, then I get the job. Because if you can make somebody emotionally feel something when they look at your work, then you've got them. So that's what I did. I worked as hard as I could. I tried to do really as good a job as I can. He's wearing jeans in the picture. I didn't know how to sculpt jeans, so I just scanned in my Levi's and just reassembled them in Photoshop. And so he's actually wearing my jeans. And yeah, I just worked really hard on that piece. And then I got an interview. And it was awesome. And I went in there, and I think probably the only question that almost stumped me was basically like, you've never worked in a game company before. Like, do you understand what crunch time is and what's required to finish a game? But I basically just said, like, I've never worked in the industry, you're right, but I understand what's required of working on a team and of working on a project, and that when the time comes, you put in the hours and you do what you have to do. And that was the one guy who was kind of critical and looking at me funny the whole time. That seemed to please him. And so, in my mind, I was like, oh, okay, good job. And I got the job. And so that's how it started.
That's awesome. Yeah. I know character modelers take a lot more time. My first art test, they sent me an email and had poly counts and all that. I got it on a Friday, and they said, have it to us by Monday.
Ooh.
It was the Railroad Tycoon company, so it was a locomotive. So I had to do a locomotive, and I basically sat in front of my computer the entire weekend.
They wanted you to do a locomotive in a weekend?
Yeah.
That's not fair.
It's early 2000s. The poly count wasn't too bad, but yeah, model, unwrap, texture.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's painful.
Cool. We have a question from Fox Monsieur in chat. He said, I've known Jonah's work for quite a while, but listening to him makes me think of how good a teacher he would be. Has Jonah ever thought about becoming an educator? Like, aside from your master classes, of course.
Aside from the master classes, I have not looked to join a particular institution. I am very knee deep in education outside of an institution, however. So I do these master classes. I've done courses for other websites like Pluralsight. I have a character design course called An Immortal Design on Pluralsight. I stream on Behance, which is Adobe's streaming service. And when on there, I do all kinds of subject matter. I do anatomy, I do portraiture, I do gesture drawing, I do concept art, cartooning, that kind of thing on there. And so people are welcome to come in and ask all kinds of questions, etc. And on my YouTube channel, a lot of that will be about learning fantasy art and how to become inspired and how to create things no one's ever seen before and that are unique and iconic and memorable. So I do love teaching. It's definitely a big part of my life. But I think what attracts me to the online format and what attracts me to doing it kind of on my own is twofold. One, I am able to provide art and education for much cheaper than an institution itself. Which again, like I'm just one guy, I'm one teacher, so it's not like you can't like suddenly like, no, it's okay. I'm Jonah Lobe's my teacher. I don't need to go to college. It doesn't work that way. But I want to be able to provide it to anybody for a low amount of money. I can provide that kind of education to anyone in the world, regardless of where they live, etc. And at the same time, and again, this is because I'm trying to develop my own personal brand and focus on that. Going out on my own and doing streaming, YouTube, and courses on my own allows me the added benefit of kind of bigging up my brand and my name. And again, once again, positioning myself within the market to participate and to kind of get a pass to participate in things like Comic-Con, all across the country, or Game Developers Conference, it kind of gives me an in many different ways. And so that's why I've been focusing not on a institution where it'd be nice to get like a paycheck and to get to know the kids and all that. The students. But I've kind of decided to go this other route because again, my heart has a nose. It knows that I want to do these different things. And I think that while I care deeply about education and I want to continue to do all these different things and expand and delve deeper into these, I do want to remain kind of on my own and as a free agent because I think it solves a lot of problems for me.
Okay, cool. Let's see. So the lore of Bethesda games can be pretty deep and confusing, to say the least. With so much pre-established, was it difficult to work within those boundaries of the stories you were given?
I didn't have to engage too much with the lore, insofar as I didn't design quests. I didn't have to research Daedric princes. I didn't have to do any of that stuff. And you'd be surprised how much of it is up for grabs or malleable. So for instance, the dragon priest masks that was a big thing in Skyrim, but they were never on the official to-do list and they were never connected to anything else in the game. And in fact, it was just me and my friend Joel conceived of that, designed it, put them in the game. I don't think there's like any written dialogue anywhere in the game that supports the dragon priest masks, or their reason for being. But in creating them and in making them look old and scattering them around the world and giving this little quest associated with them, they feel embedded in the world of Tamriel. Like they feel like they've always been there. Like, we don't even need to talk about it because that's just a part of the world. A lot of things are for grabs. For instance, I did the Nightingale bow and I asked the designer, what does the bow look like? And they're like, I don't know. And I was like, well, what's the Nightingale symbol? And they gave me the symbol and I said, okay, I'll just make something with that and integrate the symbol somehow. On the Wabbajack, which is Sheogorath's staff of madness that has unexpected effects, which is a really fun toy to play with in the game, there was no concept art for that. And I asked the designer, what should I do? And they said, I don't know. But they said, so one of my first tasks at Bethesda was I made the Shivering Isles 3-headed gate, the gate that you actually use to enter the DLC. And they said, that was cool. Why don't you do something with that? And so I designed a staff that had 3 faces. So a lot of the stuff is pretty up for grabs. And it's not, I think it's harder if you're a designer and you have to actually construct whole stories that wrap around the world and its history. But as an artist, you get to pioneer a lot of that stuff. And not a lot of it matters that deeply. As long as you're paying homage to the lore and you're cognizant of it, every game is an opportunity to reinvent. And so, and the fans like reinvention. Who doesn't, right? So in creating the Fallout 3 deathclaws, I worked as hard as I could to keep them looking like the original, but also give it my own twist. And then in updating them for Fallout 4, I was able to kind of, I felt by then that we bought the loyalty of the fan base, that they understood that that the deathclaws were ours now. And again, I looked at the original art, but then I kind of evolved it on my own. And so now the Fallout 4 deathclaws are the deathclaws, you know. None of it's too set in stone, and I'm lucky that I don't have to do that. I think that, you know, if you work for a game like, if you're working on something like Shadows of Mordor or something, anything Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, for instance, it's all settled. You know, it's all the styles have been chosen, and all the art assets are exactly the way they should be. They're canon. You cannot mess with them. And I wouldn't do well within that, because I need to fly. And so I was lucky with the world of the Elder Scrolls that there's enough wiggle room there, and it is expansive enough that it doesn't go too deep, and it hasn't yet standardized too many things such that I can't, you know, or anyone at Bethesda couldn't riff on what existed before.
Cool. Let's see. What would you consider to be the hardest part of your job currently?
What would be the hardest part of my job?
Kind of a vague question since you're doing a lot of different things, but
yes. Well, actually,
through the streaming things that you've been doing.
Well, I would actually answer it pretty easily by saying the hardest part of my job right now is working as a freelancer, is trying to figure out what my job entails and figure out how to organize myself. Keeping myself organized, keeping myself on task, keeping me tackling the things that need to be tackled is excruciating. Because as an artist and as creative, I just want to create all the time. But since leaving Bethesda, it has been a harder road. It has been a more complicated road. It is much more harrowing and full of difficulty, because I don't just have to show up every day and do my job. I have to do all manner of things, and I have to chart my own course. So I think learning how to be better at time management, learning how to be more tactical, learning how to be smarter about my professional decisions, and learning how to balance all these new fields of knowledge has been incredibly difficult and extremely valuable. I am, as a human and as a professional, I am 3 times more, what's the word? 3 times more capable and larger in my abilities than I was at Bethesda. Whereas my art has only improved like at a steady rate, you know, my abilities as a professional are huge compared to the way they were before. You know, you mentioned social media, you know, balancing social media is constant. It's every day. I'm much better at that now. You know, all these different things, just having to do them every day is very humbling, very tiring, and it's easy to get lost in it all. And so I think that probably the hardest part of my job is just being my own producer, managing my own timelines, and keeping myself organized, on task, and all that. Yeah, managing myself in a freelance world is the hardest part of my job.
Are you finding that because of the pandemic that studios are outsourcing a lot of their work? Is there like a flood? You get to pick and choose what you want to do?
Oh, good question. There hasn't been a flood per se, but I have not done a very, very good job of you know, shooting out the flare and telling people that I'm available. I did once on Twitter, and it did yield results. So actually, you know, Crowfall, that dwarf you just saw with the roots, that was me asking for work of the internet, and the internet giving me work, which is wonderful. But I don't advertise myself as a free agent that much, because I'm also very jealous of my time. And so for me, it's constantly this trying to reach this middle ground between working on my own projects, whether that's my new course or my book, or just kind of doing art that I want to do, and selling my time for different kinds of art. And so if I'm doing a game art 3D asset, that's great. But like, I also would like to then not take another one of those next. And I'd rather do a digital painting, or I'd rather focus on traditional art, you know, or on a video for my YouTube, et cetera. And so I think that the outsourcing world, especially in games, not bad right now, not bad, because, you know, in a recession, in a depression, And when people are stuck at home with a lot of time on their hands, games are popular, and game companies are uniquely placed, especially because they're a technological industry. They're uniquely placed to keep running when everything else has to shut down, because they don't need to operate within a certain studio space. They can all operate remotely. In fact, mostly your computers are already equipped to upload to a common server, et cetera. And you know that there's an audience out there looking for entertainment. So yeah, I've been doing okay. I've been doing all right. There's been work. Again, I haven't like opened myself to the floodgates, because I am so jealous of my time. But I've been pleasantly surprised, because I was depending a lot this year on going to conventions. I was supposed to go to Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle, the one in Philly, one in Toronto, here in New York, in DC, and of course they all got canceled. And so, I had the equivalent of, $10,000 at least just disappear, and all these plans I had. I'd produced all these physical art prints, for things. I'd just gotten everything ready, and then I was like, now I can't sell any of it. So I was very pleased and humbled and grateful that when I shot up the flare and asked for work, I was able to get some. And I hope that continues to be the case.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. So we've got about 15 minutes here left in the stream. Do you have anything else you'd like to ask Jason?
I went last. It's your turn, man.
Okay. I have more. So let me see. I gotta choose carefully. One of the first creatures you designed at Bethesda was the Scalon of the Shivering Isles. What would you say was the inspiration behind it, and how much control did you have in making it your own, being that you just started there?
Gosh, it was so long ago. Interesting question. I don't know that I had a tremendous amount of freedom working on it at the time, but I wasn't looking for freedom yet. I was still a shaky newbie getting used to the ropes, and I didn't have confidence in my own abilities to go off script there. So I really tried to be as faithful as I could, while also trying to be as anatomically believable as I could. I did not take great liberties with it, but I tried to work really hard on getting it done right. And I was very pleased, because it was my in one of the first team meetings for Shivering Isles, the animator did a jump attack for the Scalon, and they showed that animation in the meeting. And that sounds very simple, but at the time there'd been no jump attack for any creature in a Bethesda game. So this is the precursor to the deathclaw jump. And it was the very first time that I'd ever seen one of my own pieces of art animated by a professional for a game. And so that was a huge moment for me. So I can't recall too much about the ins and outs of designing it. I was proud of it, but I was not confident enough at the time to dream of going off script. I don't think I started going off script really until maybe later in Shivering Isles, but probably Fallout 3 probably was when I started going off on my own. And then by the time Skyrim hit, then I was fully like, okay, like now I know what I'm doing. I've done the process of making a character so many times now that at this point I feel ready to go. And moving from sci-fi over to fantasy, I was like, well, this is my stuff. Like fantasy is my jam. I'm on it. Like whatever they give me this project, I'm gonna crush it. And so I at that point I felt like I was ready to express myself more.
Okay, cool. What would you say right now are your biggest influences as an artist? Or who?
I don't know if I can name one or two people for influences. One of the things I like about social media, there's not very many good things about social media, but one of the best things about social media is the community, and the art community and the gaming community. I don't mean all those like Gamergate haters or anything like that. I mean like people who work in games, and people who like to build things, and who are nerds, and who like to create, and people who like to do art, and who like to talk art and share art supplies and tips and that kind of thing. it is an amazing community. And I am so lucky to live in a time, and we're also lucky to live in a time where we are one step away from our idols and our influences. So it's hard for me to name just one or two, because there's so many people doing amazing work on all different kinds. And because I myself am not trying to do one particular thing, I'm trying to do many things. I'm trying to do 3D art. Although my emphasis these days isn't even on 3D art. 3D art's the least of my concerns at the moment. I like to do pen and ink art. I want to be a better digital artist. I want to be a better writer. I want to, create YouTube videos and all these things. And so there are influences all around me, and there are people who are just crushing it all around me. There's an artist named Suzanne Helmig who does a lot of streaming, and she has her own series called Caldera. And she paints all these, she's constantly working on these characters and making character portraits and drawing scenes from the book. Her discipline, just getting to watch her over the course of many years, just kind of slave away on this dream of hers, makes me think, God, I want to do that. I want to do that. That looks like so much work. It looks so tiring and all that, but man, she is putting in the hours, and look what she's doing. And she's building this thing brick by brick by brick. And so, that's just off the top of my head, just one person, just who's doing the thing that I want to do, and so I have a hard time even answering that question, because there's just oodles of talent out there, and everyone's carving their own path. And it all gives me intense FOMO and intense inspiration as well,
Yep. We got 8 minutes left, Jason. Are you sure there's nothing you want to ask? Last chance.
Okay. I guess, I don't know. This might be a bad question. I am similar in respects that I like doing traditional painting, or I have other creative hobbies like music, and as you have experienced being in the world of graphics, it changes so frequently and quickly. I myself have anxiety. If I'm doing this over here, I'm not devoting my time over there, and I'm getting behind the curve. Do you feel that way? And do you deal with that anxiety, or you're whatever?
Good question. When it comes to 3D stuff, I do feel as if I'm falling behind on the curve. I feel like I feel like an old man now. I just see these 20-year-olds just doing insane stuff, in ZBrush or whatever. And there's so much functionality that ZBrush has, that 3D Studio Max has, that I am just clueless about. And I'm also I just don't work it frequently enough to be well versed in it. I've had the same tab open for ZBrush 2021 on my browser for a month now. I have ZBrush 2021, but I haven't explored any of the new functionality because who's got time, So in some realms, yes, I feel like I'm falling behind. In other realms, I think I've also, in other realms, I continue to move forward, although never at the pace I want. So something like the ink drawings, for instance, I learn a lot about art and art theory and value and value setting from doing these ink drawings. And so even though I want to become a better digital painter, I find that when I approach my ink art with certain things in mind, like composition, value balance, etc., I can rest assured knowing that I will probably be a better digital artist doing this other thing, because I'm focusing on the art fundamentals. And so a lot of what I do, I try to focus on the fundamentals of the thing. And that helps to assure me that I can approach an entire field with greater know-how. So I think the feeling of falling behind is especially the case when you are dealing with particular technology. And so I try to keep my life and the things I do in my professional life kind of geared towards the basics and the fundamentals of a thing, such that I can rest assured that in pursuing them, I am leveling up my entire every item in the skill tree gets +1, because of that movement. But there's exceptions to that. So, right, like there's like the writing, for instance, I really, I got into a groove writing every day on my fantasy novel. And then I haven't written for the fantasy novel in a couple of years. And so I'm outlining the next couple of books, but I'm not doing regular writing on them. So that's the case where I just have to be okay with that. And I have to just recognize that I will just move slower when I get to it. But that, I have a good enough eye that I can recognize quality, so that when I'm creating crap, I can know that it's crap. I can feel good about having just spent the time making that crap, and knowing that making the crap in the first place is the hardest part. Going back and editing is much easier. I can do that later. And so learning how to be patient and understanding that I am a mortal human. I can only do so much. My personal answer, which some might argue is to my detriment, is that I avoid getting too deep into any one particular piece of hardware or software, rather, which removes me from the running of some of like the best at this or the best at that. I think I'm a very, very good ZBrush user, for instance. But when ZBrush holds their annual summit and they have all these artists on there, I mean, these people are making ludicrous pieces of art in record time. Things that would take me like a month takes them like an hour, And so, I'm no longer in the running for that. I wouldn't feel confident jumping in and doing this huge ZBrush, demonstration on the ZBrush channel when all these other people are also doing it, because I'd be like, well, I can't do that, but give me enough time and I can make something real nice,
That profile piece that you did looked amazing. And I guess now that I think about it in a similar vein, I know these world-class illustrators who haven't updated their Photoshop in like 20 years. So
right.
It's just, how your process, it works. And if it works, I guess.
Exactly. Because I think a lot of it comes down to, if you're, you can work on your music and you can learn the latest music production software, but ultimately you're just creating music, right? And so if you're focusing on, you can keep the same old outdated piece of software, but just focus on creating the music and whatever. And so you can then rest assured knowing that when you finally get the new version of whatever, yes, they'll be taking some time to like learn how to ride the tricycle, but you're better at making music than you did before. And you've worked harder at the fundamentals of the art form itself, such that you feel like, yes, I'm an old hand, but I can come to this new thing, with greater confidence. I see often on social media, guys like Izzy Medrano or James Gurney, who are like, James Gurney did Dinotopia like way back. This dude does traditional paintings. He's a legend when it comes to painting and fantasy painting, etc. He doesn't work digitally. He doesn't ever work digitally. And he, a lot of his abilities haven't necessarily evolved, especially, but he's okay with that. And he's carved out his niche and recognizing that you don't have to be the best at any one given thing, but just knowing what makes you happy in life and doing those things, and just trying to be happy doing those things, it does a lot. You might not want to be a rock star on stage, writing songs no one's ever heard before, but that shouldn't deprive you of like loving music, and enjoying that. So, I'm not the video game designer that I was, or the video game artist. I think I'm still got it, but I'm not like, I'm no longer at the top of my game. I'm just not. But that's okay, because I'm playing a new game, which is the Jonah Lobe game. Like, I'm the best Jonah Lobe that I can be. And in the last 8 years, something I've learned is that Jonah Lobe is more than just the guy who made dragons for Skyrim. Granted, I will probably always be known for that. And as much as I believe that my Alvani saga is going to be the best thing that I have ever made, and I believe that in my heart, I truly, like, with every ounce of my being, I'm like, no, forget Skyrim. That's the hotness. come on, like it can sell 100,000 copies and it won't make a difference because Skyrim sold 25 million copies. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. And so but recognizing that that's okay. It doesn't, this is the best Jonah Lobe that I can be. This is the best Jonah Lobe output that I can be. And now being me means going to cons, although not this year and probably not next year, working in all these different fields. And so basically trying to just focus on the things that I enjoy and recognizing that I am not one thing or another has been really helpful in helping me avoid that feeling of panic and that feeling of anxiety. Because I feel like I'm a better professional and a better person than I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And that's progress. It doesn't matter otherwise.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Looks like we're running out of time here. So Jonah, it's been a pleasure to have you. Jason, thanks for coming along. We had a few questions in chat we weren't able to get to, but it's okay.
It's okay. I can take one or two and I can just answer them quickly if you want.
So this one would probably be quicker. My
Sure.
professor, Dan Baldwin, wants to know, for those attempting to break into the field, how would you rank the following in order of importance? Portfolio, passion, or networking?
I would say passion is first. Passion's always first. I think, without that, if you don't have the passion, why are you even applying for the industry? Why bother? So passion is first, but portfolio is a very close second. I guess, in terms of actually breaking in, the act of breaking in, probably portfolio is first, I guess. But in terms of working in a field, et cetera, passion's got to come first. But I think that I think that portfolio is probably most important. And again, gearing that portfolio towards what you want. Then networking, I think, would be last, because I think that networking can take all kinds of different forms. And it's very important, but you only, I think, gain some heft when you're networking when you already kind of have a job, I think. So I think that kind of comes in, networking becomes a thing that you do more and more of as you're within the industry already. But actually breaking in, networking can help, but at the same time, you're still a newbie. And so I think that what people ultimately care about is you showing them the portfolio and showing them what you can do.
Okay. And the other question being, tips for new grads or current students to do freelance in the game market. How can you get noticed?
I think social media does help. Having an art station certainly does help. I think it is always good to identify where you would like to do work. And that involves just putting a lot of feet on the ground, Googling games, Googling, basically just looking out there, seeing what's out there, seeing what's being made, and whether that's indie or full AAA, and putting out your resume to them. Now, of many AAA studios, you won't hear back. It's just, you can't take it personally. Like I said, when I first tried out, I didn't hear back from anybody, and I had to apply to Bethesda 3 times before I got a job. And if I submitted the portfolio that I had then to Bethesda now, I wouldn't get a job there. If I was the art director there and I saw my portfolio from back then, now I'd say, nope, next, I'd move on. So a lot of it is timing, and a lot of it is just putting yourself out there. But a lot of indie games, there's a lot of indie companies out there looking for work. And unfortunately, they're also having a hard time finding people to be their audience, and so there are sites online where you can look up small game companies, indie game companies, etc. But actually finding them, contacting them, showing them your portfolio, offering your services is probably the best. Second to just, or maybe probably first, and then second would be social media. Social media is helpful. Having an ArtStation portfolio or something very, very similar is critical. Basically, you need to have your stuff out there for people to see. You need it. The reason I say social media only has some limited help is because if you're not big on there, it's hard to gain traction. And if you're not gaining traction, then you're not getting noticed. and then you're just shouting into the void. And that is that's a ubiquitous like feeling and experience when it comes to social media. So that's why I say having a portfolio ready to go on a website like ArtStation, and if it's not ArtStation, doesn't matter, but just make it something, your portfolio simple, easy to read with only your best work. And then contacting these small places manually, because I think a lot of newbies and new grads walk around kind of scratching their heads being like, how do I get in? And they don't actually put in the grunt work to actually contact all these places individually. And like I said, most AAA studios won't write back to you, but most small studios probably will, even if they reject you. And so you kind of just have to like, it's a 2020 version of knocking on doors. You just have to knock on everyone's digital door and have the moment they open the door, just be like, look at this amazing thing. And hope that that's enough to grab them. Yeah. Otherwise, going to events is good. But again, if you're going to the event, you still have to have the portfolio. And if you are a programmer or something like that, it's much harder to show your portfolio in person. So again, it's all about being able to contact the people that you want to work for and being able to show them immediately what you can do. It's not easy. There's no simple answer to that, unfortunately. And I might not be the best qualified to, because like I said, while I am getting to be like a little bit of an old dude in the industry, I have been working on my social media and all that. And so I am visible enough. And because of my resume, I'm in a much more privileged position. So I might not be the best to answer that, but I think my answer's correct, more or less. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
All right. Well, we run a bit over, but that's okay. Jonah, great to have you. Jason, thanks for helping out. You guys have both been great. So with that,
Thank you.
with that all said, we're going to wrap up the stream here, and we'll be back at 8 o'clock for some Among Us. We're doing a little bit of a gaming hour, so.
Dope.
Yep. I'll see you guys all then.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Very nice meeting you. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Take care.
Yep.